What if I told you that before the pyramids, before pharaohs, before Egypt even existed as a civilization, there were beings who walked among humans, teaching, guiding, and perhaps ruling? Ancient texts speak of them in whispers. The Sumerians called them the Anunnaki. The Egyptians knew them as the Neteru, the gods who descended from the stars. But there's another name, older and more mysterious, the Watchers. And here's what keeps scholars awake at night: multiple ancient civilizations, separated by thousands of miles and centuries of time, all told remarkably similar stories about these beings, stories that shouldn't match, stories that predate our earliest understanding of civilization itself. Tonight, we're diving deep into the shadows of prehistory, where stone tablets speak of impossible knowledge, where megalithic ruins whisper of forgotten masters, and where the line between myth and reality becomes terrifyingly thin. Let's begin with a question that archaeology still can't answer. Who taught humanity to build civilizations? In the year 1849, British archaeologist Austen Henry Layard made a discovery in the ruins of ancient Nineveh that would shake the foundations of what we thought we knew about human history. Buried beneath layers of Mesopotamian earth, he unearthed thousands of clay tablets, the royal library of King Ashurbanipal. Among these tablets was something extraordinary: the Sumerian King List. Now, on the surface, this seems simple enough. It's a list of kings who ruled ancient Sumer, their reign lengths, and their accomplishments. But here's where it gets strange. The list begins not with mortal kings, but with beings who ruled for impossibly long periods, tens of thousands of years, each before the flood swept over the earth. The text reads, "After kingship came down from heaven." The kingship was in Eridu, came down from heaven, not established by men, not earned through conquest. Came down. The Sumerians, who gave us writing, mathematics, astronomy, and the wheel, were not prone to fantasy. They were meticulous record keepers. They documented grain stores, property boundaries, and astronomical events with stunning precision. These were practical people, so why would they begin their official king list, a legal and historical document with rulers who reigned for 28,800 years, for 36,000 years, unless they believed it was true? The Sumerian tablets speak of beings called the Anunnaki, literally translated as those who from heaven to earth came. According to these ancient records, they arrived in the region between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers sometime around 445,000 years ago. Their leader was Anu, the sky god. His sons, Enki and Enlil, took direct roles in humanity's development. Enki, the god of wisdom and fresh waters, was said to be humanity's creator and benefactor. Enlil, the god of wind and storms, served as the disciplinarian. But here's what mainstream archaeology doesn't tell you. The Sumerians weren't alone in recording these stories. Travel west to Egypt, and you find strikingly similar accounts. The Egyptian priest, Manetho, writing in the 3rd century BC, recorded a history of Egypt that begins with the reign of the Neteru, divine beings who ruled Egypt for thousands of years before the first human pharaoh. These weren't mythological gods living in some ethereal realm. According to Manetho's chronology, they were physical beings who walked the earth, established laws, taught agriculture and medicine, and built the foundational structures of Egyptian civilization. The parallels become even more disturbing when you examine the details. Both cultures describe a time when gods walked freely among humans. Both describe these beings as possessing advanced knowledge: astronomy, architecture, medicine, metallurgy. Both describe a period of divine rule, followed by a great catastrophe, a flood, after which human civilization began again, this time without direct divine oversight. Different languages, different continents, same story. Coincidence or inherited memory? Let me take you to Göbekli Tepe in modern-day Turkey. Discovered in 1994, this megalithic complex has rewritten everything we thought we knew about the timeline of civilization. Carbon dating places Göbekli Tepe at approximately 11,600 years old, predating Stonehenge by 6,000 years and the pyramids by 7,000 years. It was built when humans were supposedly hunter-gatherers, with no written language, no metal tools, and no organizational structure capable of such massive construction. Yet there it stands. Massive T-shaped pillars weighing up to 20 tons, carved with intricate reliefs of animals and mysterious symbols, arranged in precise circles that align with astronomical events. Here's the problem. According to conventional archaeology, The people who built Göbekli Tepe shouldn't have been able to. They hadn't invented agriculture yet. They hadn't formed cities. They were nomadic tribes struggling to survive. And yet, they somehow quarried, transported, carved, and erected these massive stones with such precision that modern engineers are still puzzled by the techniques used. Dr. Klaus Schmidt, the site's lead archaeologist until his death in 2014, made a startling observation. First came the temple, then the city. Göbekli Tepe suggests that complex religious or social structures preceded civilization, not the other way around. But who taught them? Who provided the knowledge and organizational framework to accomplish such a feat? The ancient Sumerians had an answer: the Watchers. The Sumerian tablets are explicit about what the Anunnaki taught humanity. In the Epic of Atrahasis, one of the oldest Mesopotamian texts, we're told that Enki created humans to serve as workers to dig canals, build cities, and cultivate the land. But Enki didn't just create servants, he created students. The texts describe them pronounced, made divine decrees or principles that governed everything from kingship to metalworking, from music to architecture. These weren't abstract concepts, they were specific bodies of knowledge, and the Anunnaki controlled who received them. Consider what the Sumerians suddenly knew. They understood base 60 mathematics, which we still use today for measuring time and angles. They mapped the solar system with shocking accuracy, including planets that shouldn't have been visible to the naked eye. Their astronomical tablets tracked Venus's movements with precision that wouldn't be matched. Until the invention of the telescope, they knew about the precession of the equinoxes, a 26,000-year astronomical cycle that requires centuries of continuous observation to detect. How did a civilization that supposedly lasted only a few thousand years possess this knowledge? The Epic of Gilgamesh mentions the Apkallisavan sages who were sent by Enki before the flood to teach humanity the arts of civilization. These beings were described as part human, part fish, emerging from the sea to deliver knowledge. Sound familiar? Nearly every ancient coastal civilization has stories of similar beings. The Dogon tribe of Moli speaks of the Namos, fish-like beings from the star Sirius, who taught them astronomy. The ancient Greeks spoke of the Telchians, mysterious sea-dwellers, who taught metallurgy and craftsmanship. Different names, different cultures, identical function. Knowledge-bearers who appeared, taught, and then vanished. Now, let's address the elephant in the room. Egypt. The Great Pyramid of Giza is attributed to Pharaoh Khufu, dated to around 2560 BCE. It's built with approximately 2.3 million stone blocks, some weighing up to 80 tons, fitted together with such precision that you can't slide a credit card between many of the stones. Egyptologists tell us it was built in 20 years using copper tools, wooden sledges, and pure human labor. That means placing one block every 4.5 minutes, 24 hours a day, for 2 decades straight. But here's what they don't often discuss. There's evidence of water erosion on the Sphinx enclosure that suggests it might be thousands of years older than officially dated. Geologist Dr. Robert Schoch from Boston University presented compelling evidence in the 1990s that the weathering patterns on the Sphinx are consistent with rainfall, not wind and sand, dating the structure to at least 7000 BC, when the Sahara was still wet. If true, this places the Sphinx in the time period the Egyptians themselves claimed it was built, the age of the gods. The Zep Tepi, or first-time ancient Egyptian texts, particularly the Edfu building texts, describe a time when divine beings established sacred sites across Egypt. These weren't metaphorical gods, the texts describe them as physical beings with advanced knowledge who laid the foundations for temples and monuments that human pharaohs would later build. Upon Manetto's chronology lists dynasties of gods and demigods spanning 36,620 years before the first human king. Modern Egyptology dismisses this as mythological inflation. But what if it wasn't? What if there really was a civilization in Egypt, or something in Egypt long before the pharaohs? What if the greatest structures weren't built by the Egyptians but discovered, restored, and claimed by them? The inventory stela found near the Sphinx contains an inscription from Khufu stating that he merely restored the Sphinx, implying it was already ancient in his time. Mainstream scholars labeled this a later forgery. But the question remains, why would anyone forge a document that diminishes the pharaoh's achievements? Here's where the story takes a darker turn. The Book of Enoch, an ancient Jewish text excluded from most biblical canons, tells a remarkably detailed story about beings called the Watchers Angels, sent to observe humanity, who instead descended to Earth, took human wives, and taught forbidden knowledge. According to Enoch, there were 200 watchers led by some. They taught humans metallurgy, cosmetics, enchantments, astrology, and the cutting of roots, possibly medicine or chemistry. Their offspring, the Nephilim, were giants who corrupted the earth. Sound mythological, perhaps, but here's the fascinating part. The Book of Enoch lists the specific knowledge each watcher taught, and it matches almost perfectly with the sudden appearance of advanced skills in the archaeological record. Azazel taught weapon making and metallurgy. Penemu taught writing and the use of ink and paper. Kazdia taught abortion and pharmacology. Amazarak taught sorcerers and root-cutters. These weren't generic myths about helpful gods. These were specific accusations of technology transfer knowledge that humans weren't supposed to have yet. The punishment, according to Enoch, was catastrophic. A great flood sent to cleanse the earth of corruption. Now, remember the Sumerian King List. It divides history into two periods, before the flood and after the flood. The reigns before the flood are impossibly long. After the flood, reign lengths become more realistic, more human. Coincidence? Or are we looking at multiple accounts of the same event, a global reset that ended the age of divine rulers and began the age of human civilization as we know it? Let's zoom out for a moment and look at the global pattern, because this is where things become truly unsettling. In Mesopotamia, the Anunnaki descended from heaven, taught civilization, ruled for thousands of years, then withdrew after a great flood. In Egypt, the Neteru ruled during the first time, established sacred knowledge and structures, then withdrew, leaving human pharaohs to continue their legacy. In Mesoamerica, the feathered serpent arrived from across the sea, taught agriculture and astronomy, promised to return, then departed. In South America, described as a bearded white god, emerged from Lake Tit, taught civilization to primitive peoples, then sailed away across the Pacific. In India, the Vedic texts describe the divine beings who battled the Asuras using advanced weapons, called Vimanis, flying machines described with technical precision that sounds eerily like modern aircraft. In China, the Yellow Emperor, Hongdi, descended from the heavens in a dragon-shaped vessel, taught medicine, mathematics, and governance, then ascended back to the sky after ruling for 100 years. Different continents, different time periods, different languages. Same story. Advanced beings descended, taught, ruled, then left. Either humanity engaged in the most elaborate, coordinated fiction in history, or these cultures were recording something that actually happened, something they didn't fully understand, interpreted through the lens of their limited technology and worldview. Modern archaeology has no satisfactory explanation for several undeniable facts. Why did civilization suddenly explode around 10,000 to 12,000 years ago? After hundreds of thousands of years of Stone Age stagnation, humans had been anatomically modern for 200,000 years. Why did it take until roughly 10,000 BCE for complex societies to emerge? And then why did they emerge so rapidly and with such sophistication? Why do the earliest civilizations demonstrate the most advanced knowledge, perfectly fitted megaliths, precise astronomy, complex mathematics, which then seems to decline over time rather than improve? Shouldn't primitive civilizations start crude and become more sophisticated, not the other way around? Why do ancient sites across the world, from Göbekli Tepe to Teotihuacan to the Giza Plateau, align with astronomical events and constellations with precision that seems unnecessary for simple farming cultures? And perhaps most mysteriously, why did so many ancient cultures claim their knowledge came from external sources, gods, sky people, culture bearers, rather than taking credit for their own innovations? Pride is a universal human trait. Civilizations throughout history have boasted of their achievements, yet the older civilizations consistently attributed their foundational knowledge to others. Why? Here's what keeps me up at night. If the Watchers were real, if there truly were beings who walked among early humans and seeded civilization, then three unsettling possibilities emerge. First possibility: they were extraterrestrial, advanced beings from another world who visited Earth during humanity's infancy, conducted what might have been an experiment or intervention, and then left. The ancient texts weren't religious mythology but misunderstood contact reports. Second possibility: they were survivors of a previous advanced human civilization, Perhaps there was a sophisticated society that predates what we recognize as civilization by cataclysm around 12,000 years ago during the Younger Dryas period, and survivors scattered across the globe, teaching primitive peoples how to rebuild. The gods were simply humans with knowledge that seemed divine to Stone Age cultures. Third possibility, they were interdimensional or terrestrial beings of an unknown type, not alien visitors but entities that coexist with us in ways we don't yet understand. Ancient shamanic traditions worldwide speak of beings from other realms who interact with our reality. Perhaps mythology wasn't ignorance, but a more accurate description of reality than our materialistic worldview allows. Each possibility is radical. Each possibility rewrites human history. And here's the terrifying part. The evidence doesn't clearly favor one over the others. So where does this leave us? Standing in the shadows of monuments we can't fully explain, holding tablets that describe events we can't fully dismiss, living in a civilization whose origins remain stubbornly mysterious. The Sumerian records are clear. Before human kings, there were other rulers. Before civilization as we know it, there was something else. The Watchers, weather gods, aliens, survivors, or something beyond our current categories left their fingerprints all over the archaeological record. They taught us to build. They taught us to write. They taught us to measure the stars and divide time. And then they left. Or did they? Some traditions say the Watchers are still here, watching from the shadows, guiding from behind the veil of visible history. Others say they'll return when humanity reaches a certain point for judgment, for reunion, or for harvest. The ancient texts promise one thing: this story isn't over. Perhaps the real question isn't who were the Watchers, but rather why did they leave? And more importantly, when are they coming back? Because if thousands of years of consistent testimony across unconnected cultures means anything, if massive megalithic sites that shouldn't exist somehow do exist, if the sudden explosion of civilization from apparent nothing actually indicates a hidden chapter in our story, then we're not the first chapter of human history. We're the sequel, and every good sequel leaves questions unanswered, setting up for what comes next. So tonight, when you look up at the stars, remember, our ancestors looked at those same stars and saw not just distant lights, but the home of those who came before, those who taught us to be human, those who might be watching still. The Watchers left us knowledge, monuments, and mysteries. Perhaps they also left us a promise that we would one day understand the truth of where we came from. That day might be closer than we think. What do you believe? Were the Watchers real? And if so, are they still watching? The truth is buried in stone and whispered in ancient texts. The question is, are we ready to unearth it?